Well, after entirely too long, I finally began my journey of playing all of the main From Software titles. I technically started last year with Sekiro, a game I absolutely adore. I loved it so much, in fact, that I beat it 5 times and got the Platinum Trophy. I started with Sekiro because I had heard it was the most unlike all the other Souls games, so I figured I would get it out of the way first. That way, I wouldn't develop any bad habits that may make Sekiro harder for me in the future. I had heard how its combat system wasn't like a traditional Souls game, so since I was coming into the whole series fresh, I figured it'd be the easiest to start with. And by and large, I think this was a good decision. I then came into Demon Souls without knowing a thing about Souls games outside of my experience with Sekiro, which honestly didn't really help me anyways. Sekiro has a posture meter and no traditional endurance bar, so when I finally got around to playing Demon Souls, it was my first taste of Souls build crafting, something that I would come to learn the hard way on. You see, in the early game, you have very little health. My strategy to overcome this lack of vitality wasn't to build more into health, but rather to build fully into strength. In most games with build crafting elements, I love to be somewhat of a glass cannon. My philosophy is to kill it before it can kill you. At the end of last year, I went super hard on Hades 1 and 2, and I found this type of playstyle to be incredibly rewarding. Beating the shit out of Hades or Kronos or Typhon is a far superior strategy than to try and avoid all their attacks and chip away at them. The longer the fight lasts, the more likely you are to get hit by their attacks and die. I also recently did a playthrough of Hollow Knight Silksong where I beat the entire game with Barbed Bracelet equipped, an item that gives you 25% more damage at the cost of making you take double damage. It's honestly not a great trade-off, believe me, but as I said, I really like to play glass cannon playstyles. So I figured by building into strength, I would be able to overpower most enemies in the game, and when it came to the bosses, once I learned their moveset and how to counter them, I'd be able to smoke them in a lot less hits, thereby not needing to avoid their attacks as much, as was my aforementioned strategy in games like Hades. But boy was I wrong. There were two flaws in my theory. First is that the strength stat really doesn't do shit for you in this game. Yes, it allows you to one-hand certain weapons like the Claymore, which was my weapon of choice through most of the game, more on that in a bit, and certain weapons damage scales with certain weapon stats. Like if a weapon's main stat is strength, then that weapon will increase its damage based on your strength stat. The problem, I quickly came to find, is that a lot of good weapons scale with stats that aren't strength. This really pigeonholed me into usually using just one or two weapons, as any other weapons I would have wanted to try would feel far weaker. But live and learn, right? Not a big deal. I could just respec my stats. Nope. This game has no respecking option, which in my opinion is fucking bullshit. Like, it honestly really sucks. It's unforgiving in a way that feels extremely bad. It's unforgiving because out of sheer ignorance, you can completely fuck yourself. I had no idea how useless of a stat strength would be, despite speccing all my early points into it. And as you buy levels, the levels get increasingly more expensive. So in the early-ish game, I was getting nuked by bosses and enemies because I had way too low of health, and no real way to build that stat up. Sure, I learnt my lesson, but I couldn't just respec because the game doesn't let you, and I couldn't buy more vitality because the cost was extremely expensive at this point, and I would usually die whenever I could get a decent stockpile of souls going, thereby losing my souls. As a result, I had to go and farm one enemy over and over for like 6 hours to build up a bunch of souls and then get myself some vitality. Where if there was a respec option, I could have saved myself a boatload of time and just taken points of strength and put them into vitality. You see, vitality not only gives you more health, but it also gives you increased damage resistance. So like I said, in the early game, I was getting murked, often killed in just 1 or 2 hits. Again, this is not a big deal in most glass cannon builds because you can often just nuke the enemy before it hits you, but that's not how things work in Demon Souls because strength does not give you a flat bump to damage output. Something I now know, but sadly, I didn't know when I specced all my stats into strength. This made it very hard to learn enemy attack patterns because you can't get much practice in before you die. And that is a problem because the lack of checkpoints in this game is fucking severe. So that brings us to the difficulty discussion. This game is not that hard, to be honest. I first tried like 7 bosses in this game, maybe more, because once I actually had some vitality, I could just kite the boss for a bit and learn its moveset, use my heals, and then finally take them down quite easily. Did I miraculously just get good? Well, yeah, maybe a little bit. Obviously, I got better at the game over time. But what made it more easy is the fact that I had enough health to withstand some shots, and I finally had a reserve of grass to heal my HP back up when I did take damage. In the early game, I was destitute on all levels. I didn't have much health at all, so if I did get hit and actually survived, I'd basically be one shot, so I would have to use up my limited supply of grass. And like I said, I had less DR because it scales with vitality and dexterity. Once I figured that out and got a balanced build, the game was not hard at all. And the parts where it was hard was simply due to annoying and tedious design rather than being truly difficult. The Man-Eater boss in this game was actually one of my favorites because it only had like a 2 to 3 minute long run back to get to. So even though the fight was a decent challenge where you had to fight 2 gargoyles at once, at least I could get reps in at a quick pace. It only took me 6 tries to beat this boss. Some runbacks in the game are easily over 5 minutes long, and the enemies that you have to kill to get to them are obnoxious as hell. The enemies themselves aren't all that hard. The AI is very easy to manipulate and bait. What is hard is doing this over and over and over again. Not because it's actually difficult, but just because it's long and tedious. This is not fun game design in the slightest. I often got to bosses the easiest on my first attempt because I was taking the enemies out slowly and methodically because I didn't know where I was going. I didn't look up guides for this game, so I was just taking my time and exploring the levels. But once I got to a boss, I was like, okay, now I just gotta get back in there. And I would want to rush it because at that point, I had seen the whole level and now it was time for the boss fight. But in my impatience, I would die over and over to the enemies on the run back to the boss. Not because I'm bad and don't know how to deal with them, but because dealing with them is too slow and monotonous. It's not engaging. I would get the runbacks down so I could complete them as fast as possible, knowing which enemies I could skip right past to speed things up. But even with that, some of the runbacks took close to 10 minutes. The background footage that I have to start this video is the run back to Old Hero. It's not especially difficult, but it is extremely slow and annoying. You have to kite the skeleton dudes, avoid the long range attacks from the floating stingrays. The magic soul enemies have a long range magic attack. All the enemies you encounter are on a skinny path with no way around them, you have to go through them. There's a Grim Reaper type dude who is hidden to take you out with a cheap shot when you round the corner. None of it is hard, but it's very slow going. And I have a giant character flaw. I despise having my time wasted. I always have my whole life. I just can't do it. Time is the most precious resource on earth, and I am quite an impatient person. So having to do these long, boring runbacks pissed me off to no end. I hated it. It was not fun in the slightest, just grueling game design made to intentionally aggravate the player. The lack of checkpoints is by design to frustrate you. A big reason why I first tried so many bosses later in the game, like I think the final 8 bosses I first tried, is because I actually did watch a boss fight beforehand. I never knew what boss I was stumbling onto before I got to it. I wanted each boss to be a surprise for me, but if I did die to it once, in the second half of the game, I would just go to YouTube and look up how to beat it. And I only did that because getting to the boss was so fucking annoying. Again, not hard, just boring. And I didn't want to keep wasting hours of my life on a run back just to face the boss. I'll gladly bash my head against the wall for hours on a boss until I learn its moveset and overcome it with no help from guides. Demon of Hatred and Ishin the Sword Saint are some of my favorite boss fights in video games. I sucked at both at first, but they were both extremely satisfying fights to learn. Simon and Clair Obscure Expedition 33 took me like 5 hours to beat, the longest I've ever spent on a boss. Owlfather took me like 2 hours in Sekiro. But the fun of it came from fighting the actual boss over and over until you knew every trick that the boss had and how to counter it. In Demon Souls, the boss fights are piss easy outside of maybe Flame Lurker and Man-Eater. Like, they're genuinely not hard at all. Like I said, I first tried like my final 7, and that was without any guides because I would just take my time and I actually had resources to get my health back during the fight if I did take damage. Quick side note, once I got the regenerator ring in this game, it became so easy. If I didn't want to waste grass, I could just chill while my health slowly regenerated. This allowed me to stockpile a ton of grass so that when I got to those later bosses, I could heal my way through the fight while I learned on the fly, just so that I didn't have to do that annoying run back again. The run back for the final boss in the game probably took me at least 15 minutes, but I first tried the boss just because I knew I was not going to go through that again. But back to the bosses themselves, they're all quite easy, and I'm sure the early game bosses would have been quite easy as well had I spec'd my character properly. Before making this video, I watched some how-to boss guides, and it seems many are weak to magic, but a common theme on almost all of them is they're all weak to a certain thing. I don't mind this when it's done right, but in this game, it's very hard to tell what will work outside of trial and error, and I don't really like that. Sekiro has some of this design as well though. I remember seeing that snap peas were great on the corrupted monk and other tools or prosthetics that could make the game easier, but I just wish there were more hints. Some mechanic in the game that can teach you that. I first tried the first boss of the game, the Phalanx. I had tons of firebombs, so I just lobbed them in there on my first try. Turns out that's the best way to beat that boss, but I was just using the limited tools that I had available. But for later bosses, there are so many things available, so you kind of just have to test things out and see what works. I don't totally mind this, but I wish there was some more direct way of the game teaching you what might work on a certain boss. Like Flame Lurker, if there was a water type element, that would totally make sense, to use water on the flaming enemy and that flames would likely do nothing. That is using the boss character design to influence the player on what to pick. Except as far as I'm aware, there's no water attack, so magic is what it's weak to. But with other bosses, its weaknesses aren't obvious at all. Apparently the final boss is weak to pointy damage like a spear, but I didn't have any spears leveled up, so I just used my katana and whittled them down. Again, I wish there was more indicators of what you should be using. Old Hero is a great example of this actually done well. Right away during the boss cutscene I noticed that he was blindfolded, so I knew I had to sneak around and avoid hitting the pots. Sadly, he did kill me on my first attempt, so the first thing I did was look up a guide cause that runback sucks ass, and it said to use the thief ring, which I did not have yet, but if I did have it, I probably would have clued in to use that. Down in the poison swamp area, I was trying to fight the trolls and kept getting murked. I looked up a guide and it said to use the sodden ring. Soon as I had that, it was easy to get past. But again, I didn't have that ring yet or know it even existed. And the way to get it is obnoxious as hell. You need to find it in a completely different world during Black World Tendency. There's also All White Tendency. I won't go into what World Tendency is, there's lots of guides on how to change it, but suffice to say, I do not like this system. I think it sucks that there are items that are only available to find in certain world tendencies. I think the whole system is dumb and I don't like it at all. It's convoluted as hell and not explained in-game in the slightest. The YouTubers and the people that do wikis for these games are amazing and better people than me because fuck all that. I cannot be asked to scour every region of the game on every world tendency. Maybe if changing world states was easier, then sure, but it's a pain in the ass and something I just didn't engage with outside of having to do it to get the sodden ring. I like to play games blind and not look anything up, but in this game, some stuff is just way too obscure. There was yellow paint and basically solving the game for you. I'm not a fan of that at all. But apparently I do like a little hand-holding. At least explain things in-game. Explain that weapon damage scales to certain stats. Explain that certain weapons are good on certain types of enemies or allude to it in some way. This game seems to want the player to just trial and error their way through the whole thing, and as I mentioned, I am just not patient enough for that kind of bullshit. I even made a second character at one point because I was so annoyed at my stat allocation, so I made a magic caster. And then I equipped the pickaxe in the tunnels because it was a weapon I had just found, and it actually worked really good against the miners. Turns out that is their weakness. Rather than to swords, they're weak against, again, pointy objects. But how are you supposed to know that outside of trial and error? I just found the game did not do enough to guide you. And as for the combat, the fact that I first tried the final boss tells you all you need to know. The combat is not that hard. As I said, the difficulty comes from enemy placement. I died more to just getting caught in a bad position by an enemy around the corner, or my camera locking onto the wrong guy, or doing some janky ass physics bullshit than I ever did in a straight up duel. The level design is perfectly crafted to piss you off. Magicians on a stairwell with nowhere to go. Trapdoors that fire arrows at you and kill you. Fighting pirates on a cliffside while manta rays shoot arrows at you. And you can't deal with those manta rays either. Just so many annoying level design choices that are made to frustrate you. The enemies aren't hard on their own, so they have to lock you in with a few in tight spaces where you can't manage them all. There are workarounds, but you have to know about those, and the first time you encounter those spots, you will die. Again, to me, it's just annoying rather than engaging. I love Hollow Knight Silksong. They have some tough sections as well, but the thing with that game is you can combat your way out of the hairiest situations if you're good enough, because the controls are extremely tight and snappy. The controls in this game are not. Again, the amount of times I got just because my camera did some bullshit is too many to count. This does not feel good. When you die because it feels like you had no counterplay and just died because the controls fucked you over, that's a really bad feeling because it's not really on you, it's on poor game design. In Silksong, when you die, it's all on you. The level design is cool in the sense of the different worlds. I did like the different world aesthetics, and even the bosses were cool to look at, even if lots were lame to fight. The enemy variety is also very good. The puzzles are quite basic, but this is a game from 2009, so that's fair. Having hidden keys or breakable walls and stuff was pretty cool. I gotta give props on the world design, even if I hated the overly long runbacks. It was fun to explore through each area the first time, but when you have to trek back over and over, it just gets boring. And that boring monotony builds up into frustration when you just want to go at the boss again but keep dying to annoying bullshit on the way. If the checkpoints were put outside of the boss room, I bet my playtime would have been cut in half. I'm not even exaggerating. It felt like it was done this way just to annoy and aggravate the player, and it certainly succeeds at that. As for every boss having different weaknesses, it is a cool idea, but figuring out what it is weak to is needlessly obtuse, as are many things in the game. All in all, I hated my first half of playing this game, mostly because of not being able to respec my stats. The second half of the game got a lot better once my character wasn't hampered by my bad decisions early in the game. I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to Dark Souls 1 next, armed with some knowledge about how this genre of games works now. I'll be live streaming it on Twitch at itssizzle7, so come check it out. Unlike Sekiro, I won't be playing any more of Demon's Souls. I rolled credits and I'm good with that. I don't feel like trophy hunting or getting the platinum. I just don't find the game to be that fun in all honesty. Again, what I loved about Sekiro was how simple it was. You just had to get good and learn each boss in the combat, and that was it. There was no overpowering things with cheesy builds, where in this game, I do love that you can play a variety of ways. I would love to try a magic build in a future playthrough. Having different classes and weapons does give the game a lot of replayability, so props to them on that. And there are tons of cool weapons that I never used because leveling up weapons takes a long time. That's another thing I didn't really mention, but the economy in this game is very stingy. It's why I stuck to like 3 swords throughout my whole playthrough. But it is cool that there's a variety of weapons to choose from and different ways to play. But even with those elements in place, it's just not a game I want to replay for the reasons mentioned above. I'm glad I stuck it out because, as I said, I didn't mind the second half of the game when I actually had a decent build and some good rings to help me out. But that first half was rough as hell, and I was truly in a bad mood every time I finished playing. I'm not exaggerating, I was just in a pissy mood every time I'd get off the game. Here's hoping the Dark Souls series is funner than this one. I always hear about how great those games are, so I'm excited to see. I loved Sekiro, and I really did not like Demon's Souls at all, so I'm very curious to see about the rest. Anyways, that's it. Let me know down below what you think of Demon's Souls if you've played it. I watched a couple videos on YouTube from people who love the game, and a lot of the stuff that I bitch about, like the bosses being easy but all having a weakness, is something that they personally love, where I just found it to be annoying. So to each their own, that's the beauty of gaming. Not everyone likes the same things. Speaking of likes, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more gaming news and reviews. Lastly, if you are still here, thanks so much for watching to the end. I appreciate it. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.